discuss UPSC's English Literature Optionals 2025 paper. And today I'm going to be discussing paper 2 specifically, the entire paper 2. The idea is to help 2026 aspirants who are going to be sitting for the exam mains in some time. I'll go through 2025, 24, 23, 22, as many papers as I can. And I'll give you some ideas on the recurring themes, recurring ideas, and hopefully we'll be able to discuss what specific kind of conceptual questions UPSC asks from various texts. So from different texts, different authors, what specific kind of, can we see a pattern somehow? So I always love discussing question papers, and I'm doing it completely impromptu. I don't have notes or anything. I'll just go through this paper with you guys and see what I feel about this paper. So here we go. I hope you can all see this paper. Yeah. Okay. So this is 2025. I'm sure you all know what the instructions are. I'll quickly repeat. If you're sitting for the exam for the first time, obviously you know it. There are 2 sections, 8 questions. In all, you have to do 5 questions. Question number 1 and question number 5 are compulsory. And 3 questions you have to do overall. So 2 are compulsory, 1 you have to pick. So a lot of students think that they can game this system and they can prepare only the poetry section or only the prose section well. So when they have to pick the remaining 3 questions, they can pick. What do you pick? You can pick the remaining 3 questions from, let's say, only the poetry section. You pick all the questions from the poetry sections, and you don't have to do anything from prose, or you can do something similar with prose. Don't do it. Don't try to game the system. Whenever I teach my students, I specifically tell every aspirant to prepare the entire syllabus. You should be able to do all the 8 questions. If you are going in the exam and you only know 4 questions, you've only prepared for the 4 questions or 5 questions, let's say only poetry or prose, then you are leaving a lot on luck. And luck doesn't favor you if you're not well prepared. So you should be prepared to do all the 8 questions, and in the exam room, you pick the best that you can, that you feel that, okay, out of all these questions, these are my best. And that exercise should take you about a couple of minutes. And that will only happen if you have prepared well, if you prepare the entire syllabus. So let's quickly look at, this is paper 2, by the way. So the first question, as you all know, is compulsory question, section A, poetry. So they give you 5 pieces of poetry from all the 5 poets. We have 5 poets in the syllabus. 1 each from everyone. W.B. Yeats, the first one. T.S. Eliot, the second one. W.H. Auden, the third one. Larkin, and then Ramanujan. So this is pretty neat. So that also tells you that you have to prepare everyone. You have to prepare all the poems of all the poets. Let's say you did only 2 poems or 3 poems of W.B. Yeats, and then the question came and you haven't prepared that poem. 10 marks gone. So all the poems, all the poets, every author, every text. So the first one, W.B. Yeats, and may her bridegroom bring her to a house where all's accustomed, ceremonious, for arrogance and hatred are the way. So this is, when I discuss this poetry question, I won't go into details. I won't give you the answers. That's not the point of, I'm not solving this question paper for you. I'll just give you strategic, very razor focused, because now you have very limited time. And I am presuming that you have done the syllabus. So we are fine tuning stuff strategically. So I'm not going to solve this question paper for you if that's what you're looking. So when we do these questions, this is 50 marks. These 50 marks should be easy pickings for you. Both compulsory questions, 100 marks. You should be aiming to get at least 60 to 70 there. Little ambitious, but you should be able to get it. It's not out of the bound target. 60 to 70 here. So critically comment in about 150 words on each of the following. So 150 words is two sides of the sheet. Critically comment. So there are two things we do when we are doing this poetry question. When they are saying critically comment, first of all, you obviously identify the poem. You place these lines. You're not explaining the literal meaning of these lines, right? They're asking you to do a critical commentary. So that right away starts from level 2. So they're not asking, okay, what is the literal meaning of these 4 lines? So first of all, they've given you random lines from a large poem, and they're asking you critically comment. So first of all, you have to place these lines within the thematic context of the entire poem. Okay. So let's take a poem that is, let's say, I like Philip Larkin's my favorite poet. This is from Deceptions. All the unhurried day, your mind lay open like a drawer of knives. So you place these lines within the thematic context of the entire poem. So if you read Deceptions, quickly circle back to the thematic context of that entire poem. And the speaker is talking about the state of mind, the psyche of the victim. Your mind lay open like a drawer of knives. Obviously, there is a figure of speech here, like a drawer of knives, right? There is a figure of speech. You identify it well. If you identify any figures of speech, you should mention that. But the very first thing you have to do is place these lines when you say this is from Deceptions, and then you build the premise of the theme, not the general theme. They've given you these 2 lines, or these 4 lines, or 5 lines as a pointer to what aspect of that theme that they want you to discuss. Okay, so these lines, these they're a pointer for you. So they're the hint. So this is about the state of mind of the victim that Larkin's talking about. So the entire poem Deception, if one of the thematic ideas is that he's talking about something that happened long back. He read it in the newspaper, and then he's recollecting. He's trying to build together the picture of that victim's state of mind. The state of mind, trying to understand it, be empathetic towards it. That is one of the thematic ideas of this. And he says it that there is no way I can understand it. Okay, I cannot understand it. I cannot come close to understanding what you must have gone through. So that is one of the thematic ideas. So you place these 2 lines within the overall thematic idea, which is relevant and appropriate to these lines. That's the first thing you do. Then come out and you take these 2 lines again, and now you expound upon these 2 lines, still staying within the compass or the framework of the thematic context that you've set. So only 2 things we are doing in each of these poetry explanation. One, build a thematic context which is relevant to these lines, and then expound upon that. So that is your 2 pages. Okay, do it with each one of them. So that's so now this is a lottery. Maybe you'll get lines which are from a poem that you know well, or but you have to read all the poems, all the thematic context of each poem, and once you've done it, you never forget. That's the good thing about literature. Okay, so at this point, let me get you to an idea that I discuss when we are doing these questions. Now at this stage, you have done the entire syllabus. You practiced answer writing. I hope you've written hundreds of answers. I hope by now, and your handwriting and your speed, even for GS answers, you know how much, what's your speed, how much you can write. So when you're looking at a literature paper, it's a rather long, lengthy paper. You get only a few minutes to tackle every question. Once you've looked at the question paper, you have ticked which questions you're going to be attempting, and then you move very quickly. One key idea, key strategy, one key practice that I always tell every student, and I keep telling this. This is something I recurringly remind every aspirant. You cannot do thinking and writing at the same time. That is why we practice answer writing a lot. So when I teach answer writing to any student, I teach them, I tell them to practice thinking separately. What happens is, as we look at the question, we open two tabs, multiple tabs, and we start writing. So when we are writing and thinking, it is nowhere near as organized as thinking first, organizing first, and then writing. So writing is the formal curation of your ideas. It's step two. It is always step two. Speaking is the same. So whatever I'm speaking, because I'm so practiced, so used to, I know the context, I know the content, I know the domain, I know the subject so well. But that thinking, organizing part is still happening in my brain. It is happening much faster. But I'm still pausing and thinking and recall. It's happening. So it seems like I'm thinking, organizing, and speaking at the same time, but I am not. It's just the thinking is happening very fast. When it comes to writing, even when I write, I don't write and think at the same time. So I advise everyone, if you have practiced it, this is something you can still practice in whatever number of weeks you have. Take a moment to think and organize your ideas. So even if you have 3 minutes to write this 150 words answer, take 30 seconds to organize. Even if you have to do some mind mapping, some jotting on a piece of paper, that is organizing and thinking. But when you start writing, you should have a pretty decent idea of the structure of what you're going to write. Does that make sense? That is a very, very specific hack. Okay, so let's go back to the paper again. Now we're getting into longer questions, 15, 15, 20, and we'll go through the entire paper. This is the poetry section. So the very first question is Eliot's Love Song of Alfred Prufrock explores the psychological chaos and alienation associated with modernism discussed. So when you're picking questions, obviously you have to do all three. And so you read all three. Comment on WB, it is apocalyptic and prophetic enunciations contained in the prescribed poems. Okay. On the basis of your readings of A.K. Ramanujan's poems, trace the elements of quintessential Indian ethos contained therein. So, two of the three questions are about the entire poetry section and the entire poetry gamut of that poet. One is specific about one poem. Okay. I'm sure everyone does Alfred Prufrock very well, and this is a pretty standard thematic concept that is asked every other year. So if you're comfortable with B and C questions and you're comfortable with A, this is a pretty decent question to do. Very scoring, because B and C give you a lot of scope. You can bring in different poems and make your points. So questions like these are very good questions where you can work on multiple poems in one answer, right? So maybe there are 5 poems, and so you can bring in 3 or 4 or 2. You'll always be able to gather a lot of examples, as opposed to a question that is specifically about one poem, like the first one. And this will always happen. One of the 3 questions will be tricky. So that's how the lot is arranged somehow. Uh, this is a live, and you can leave the comments, which I'll get back to after this session is over. If we read the next one, analyze W.H. Auden's poetry as a blend of historical context with modern critique. Again, this allows you to bring in all the poems. Philip Larkin's poems of disgust and despair hid a wounded romantic temperament behind a mask of irony. Elucidate. Again, you can bring in all the poems. Discuss how modernism in literature experimented with language, form, and style to represent the complexities of then contemporary human life. Make use of the prescribed text to substantiate your answer. Okay, this is a 20 marker, and this is a tricky question. Tricky because it's broad. Anything that is broad, that opens up a lot of space, is always going to be tricky. It might look like, okay, there are a lot of entry points you can enter and you can solve this, but it forces you to make a lot of decisions. It's 20 marker, obviously, it's around 300 words, but it's only 4 pages. So you'll have to make decisions on what angles, what texts, what examples, because it is telling you look at the entire modernism section of poetry. The first decision is they're saying prescribe text to substantiate your answer. But this is a poetry section, so please don't bring in the prose texts here. That's the first thing. That is pretty common sense, but students get confused here. So the first thing is it opens you with all the poets, all the at least modernist poets. So we have T.S. Eliot, W.H. Auden, Philip Larkin. You can leave out because it's post war. After at least Eliot, Auden, and W.B. Yeats. 3 poets, so many poems. It opens up a lot of things, and then it throws the concept of modernism. So literary theory comes in, your understanding of modernism comes in. So this is a conceptual application. What do you understand about modernism? And then in modernism, they're giving you very specific idea. From here, in literature, experimented with language, form, and style. Sorry. To represent the complexities of then contemporary human life. In a sense, this is a pretty decent copybook definition of modernist literature. Modernist literature experimented with literature, form, and style. For what? Why did they devise all those techniques, stream of consciousness, interior monologue, all that? Why did they devise all that? That is to be able to demonstrate, illustrate, represent the complexities of human life in the modern age. That is why, that is what they were trying to do. So this is pretty copybook definition. So in a sense, if you've studied and understood modernism, this should be a very scoring question for you, because you can pick and choose which texts to bring. You have 3 poets, you can pick and choose which poems to bring, and this is a pretty good. So this second question, question number 3, is it allows you a bit more freedom. So Auden's poetry is a blend of historical context with modern critique. He's writing about the war, the poem September 1, 1939, historical context, modern critique, right? Petition, there is a historical context, modern critique. Even the Shield of Achilles, superb example of this, historical context, even the classical context, but modern critique. So you pick your poems, you pick your examples. If you can remember the lines, the quotes, this is a pretty good question to attempt. Philip Larkin, disgust and despair hid a wounded romantic temperament behind a mask of irony. Now this is tricky because it's throwing a lot of ideas. Disgust and despair, 1. Wounded romantic temperament, 2. Mask of irony, 3. So mask of irony is his technique, is his method, is his craft. Wounded romantic temperament is the psyche of the poet. They're saying this is what he was. And poems present a pretty gloomy disgust and despair atmosphere, and they create seemingly they create this kind of a sadist atmosphere. So three things, three keywords, three ideas, you have to work them together, understand. Once you understand it, bring in the poems and the examples and solve it. Good question, I like this. Okay, fourth one. These are the two drama questions. Now the good thing is both the drama questions are in one question. So if for some reason you skipped both the plays, Look Back in Anger and Waiting for Godot, you can skip this question. How does Jimmy Porter's anger? Now Jimmy Porter's anger is the key conceptual idea, right? When you read Look Back in Anger, Jimmy Porter's anger. How, why, how is it manifested in the play? All that. How does Jimmy Porter's anger functions as both a critique of post-war British society and a manifestation of personal inadequacies? Now, there are two things happening here. Critique of post-war British society. This in itself has been asked as a question more than once. How is Look Back in Anger a critique of post-war British society? Critique of contemporary British society. So this in itself is a complete question, complete idea. But they're asking you to juxtapose it with the second idea, manifestation of personal inadequacies. So in a way, if you understand the thematic idea of this play, Look Back in Anger actually showcases how personal inadequacies of characters like Jimmy Porter, personal inadequacies are manifested in the society, creating a post-war society where everyone felt annoyed, irritated, disappointed, discouraged, and kind of in a vacuum, right? So it's a good. It's if you've done this play, this is a pretty straightforward question for you to do. Next one: how does modernist poetry employ symbolism to give an ironic twist to descriptions in order to create meaning? Okay, second modernism question. When you are looking at modern poetry and irony and to try and arrive at a meaning, there is nothing better than Love Song of Alfred Prufrock. The entire character is embroiled in irony. Let us go, you and I, when the sky is spread against the sky. When the what's the second line? Etherized upon the table against the sky, right? Let us go, and then he starts with let us go, but he never moves anywhere. He doesn't go anywhere, right? He talks about let us commit. It's time to make a decision. It's time to make all the decisions, but he never ends up making any decisions, right? So the entire poem is ironic twist, irony, steeped in irony, to come to a meaning. Meaning, what is a meaning? What is, if we specifically talk about Love Song of Alfred Prufrock, that character illustrates the complexity of modern men that is devoid of any meaning, an idea that will expand when Samuel Beckett and this whole movement of absurdism and existentialism will take shape. So the modern man is searching for meaning because all the societal meanings, all the structures of the society that gave a modern man meaning, for example, religion, for example, science, for example, spirituality and God, for example, the social political structures, they were all devastated. If you look at any of my lectures on modernism, I talk about all these ideas that they were towards the end of the Victorian age. Science challenged religious ideas. Then political structures were shattering across the Europe, entire Europe and the world. So all the structures that gave meaning to an ordinary man, they were all shattered. So a modern man is disillusioned, searching for what the hell this is all about. So if you understand modernism well, and you can pick, there are a lot of other great poems that are, you can pick multiple poems and bring in and do this question. Brilliant question to do. Now, then we move on to waiting for Godot. How does Beckett use absence to challenge traditional notions of time, purpose, and meaning? So the entire existentialism we just talked about is accepting the idea of meaninglessness. So man's search for meaning, Albert Camus, the French philosopher and author, said the search for meaning is an absurd idea. So when Waiting for Godot, Samuel Beckett, the entire play, the way it is produced and written and produced, there is an absence of the linearity chronology of time. That is a deliberate, device. There is an absence of purpose, and obviously there is an absence of meaning. So how he does it, that's all this question is all about. So this is probably, in my experience, Waiting for Godot questions are the easiest questions to do because they revolve around these ideas, and they are, a lot of the time, they're 20 markers. The play sounds and reads complicated, but the questions they'll fetch you a lot of marks. Any questions, any comments? Please leave comments in the obviously in the comment section. Now we come to the prose part. At this stage of your preparation, one, you don't need to go through and read any of the text again. Obviously, if you have read the text well first time around and you have marked a lot of areas, you can quickly just look at those areas and quotations. And when you are practicing questions now, practice a lot of different PYQs per text, different angles, different PYQs, and try to understand that every text has 3 or 4 conceptual recurring ideas. That's it. There's nothing beyond it. Moving on to the prose section. First question, compulsory part. 150 words each. Discuss how industrialization impacts the characters and their relations in Lawrence's Sons and Lovers. Very open and very easy question. They could make it more specific. Industrialization, something that they normally ask when they ask anything from Hard Times, Charles Dickens, or Victorian texts. So this is a pretty fresh idea that they're applying. In Sons and Lovers, the premise is the father of Paul. He is a miner, and so the entire household, the entire growing up, the entire ecosystem was, the first page, the first couple of pages, in fact, the first chapter is presenting you the picture of industrialization and how him, the father being a miner, how that impacted everything in the text. So this is a 150 marker, only 2 pages. So you have to make a decision, what exactly are you going to write about. Characters. So the first character, do talk about the father and his relations with the wife, with the kids. Even if you take just the father and study how being a minor impacted his relationship with the wife and the kids. There's a lot of 10 marks worth of stuff there. But that is not the only approach. You are free to pick any other angle. This is, I'll just give you one example. These 10 markers, you have to be very specific. You have to make a decision very quickly. One idea, very specific idea. You only have 2 pages. You cannot build a lot of context and premise. The very first couple of sentences should be zooming in right away with what your argument is. The second one, the presence of a female narrator underlines the feminized Gandhian approach of submission and non-aggression. In Kantapura, elucidate. Okay. They're talking about Ratna. They're talking about the narrator who's an old woman. Uh, Female narrator, that's Achakka. And then one of the primary character, Ratna, who's also described as a subaltern and very strong, probably the strongest voice in the text. Even though Murthy is supposedly the Gandhian voice, but he fails towards the end. But Ratna holds on. So the narrator, you have to talk about the narrator here. So that is very clear. Don't go too much towards Ratna or any other female characters. Stay with Achakka, the female narrator, and stay with the keywords that they want you to work at. Feminized Gandhian approach of submission and non-aggression. The passive aggression, the non-violence approach of passive demonstration. Pretty straightforward. Discuss Joyce's support of the artist as a young man as a rumination on Irish nationalism. This is again a fresher take, but it is again a socio-political question. Every text that I teach, I always ask students, the very first thing is always study the socio-political background of the time when the text was written. You cannot separate the text from the society. Literature is a mirror of the society. Socio-political context. Without that, you cannot understand the text. So if you read this text, if you read anything about Irish nationalism, there are elements. The entire text is very political, and in fact, the primary protagonist Stephen Dedalus, the theme of the text is that he has to escape though all the societal structures to become an artist. He realizes that he cannot be an artist if he remains within any of the social structure, whether it's historical, whether it's nationalism, whether it's political, whether it's religious, and there are all these structures are shown in the text. So in order to become an artist, he realizes that he have to go away, out. That's why he moves his country. Right? So this is a pretty decent question. Analyze the treatment of time in the novel Mrs. Dalloway. So when you're reading Mrs. Dalloway, you cannot not understand about the time. It's a story of 24 hours, but 140 odd pages. The actual time, the present continuous time, is the time that we spend with Mrs. Dalloway. But the time of the plot, the time of the story is decades. Even when she was 18, the very first page, the second or third paragraph, she opens the window in the Burton Street, fresh of air. She remembers that. So she goes back when she was 18. So time, the concept of time, how Mrs. Dalloway as a text works with the idea of time, and to what impact. Treatment of time. Post-colonial reading, as straightforward as it can get. When you do Passage to India, this is the first concept we do, post-colonial reading of Passage to India. So what is a post-colonial reading? The quickest way to help you understand the impact of how does a text how does a text show the impact of colonialism on the natives. So when you read A Passage to India, what impact of colonialism can you see on the natives? That's the post-colonial reading, right? Okay. Moving on, longer questions. Conrad. The Laudium documents the exploitative nature of European colonialism. The keyword here is exploitative. This is pretty factual, objective kind of a question. So you bring in all these examples where you see exploitative nature of colonialism, and he just documented. V.S. Naipaul's House of Mr. Viswas in the light of the following quotation. They had grown up in the heart of darkness and at the edge of the world, and beyond was the real world, cold and unexotic, where their fate was written. This is a tricky question. Any quotation question is a tricky one. So you analyze this. So what do you understand from this quote? So the real world was cold and unexotic. So the Caribbean's world, when we look from the outside, seems very exotic. But the real world, where these people, even if the natives or the immigrant settlers, all the post colonial population, for them the real world was cold and unexotic, where their fate was written. Mohan Viswas, his fate was written in a world which was very cold and harsh. His life was very difficult, even though. So, build up your argument around that. Marxist analysis. Now, this is a very rare question, even though post-colonialism, psychoanalysis, Marxism, and feminism, these are four literary theoretical ideas that are part of your syllabus. But psychoanalysis and Marxism, they very rarely ask. So my bet that in 2026, they'll probably ask psychoanalysis, I guess, because they won't definitely repeat Marxist. Marxist analysis can be used as a tool to reveal the oft hidden structures in literary texts. Analyze any two novels prescribed in your syllabus in the light of the above statement. Okay. Now, when they are saying any two novels prescribed in your syllabus, do they mean paper 1 and paper 2 both? Or do they mean only prose novels in paper 2? I don't have an answer to that. When they're saying any two novels prescribed in your syllabus, so syllabus is both paper 1 and paper 2. But to play safe, I'd still stick with texts in paper 2. Marxist analysis, again, just like post-colonial analysis, I gave a very quick practical workaround for Marxist analysis. That is Marxist analysis of a text, of any text, whether it's a film or a book or a novel or an essay or a societal structure, is to spot the class dynamics. That's the first thing. If you can spot a clear class dynamics, that is a structure. Take any text, every text has a class dynamics. Any human society, any human story, there will be a class dynamics. There is going to be an upper and a lower class in the most standard definition. Okay? Any text, let's say Sons and Lovers, miners, working class, and then there are other classes. So the wife came from slightly higher, better than the father's social class. So first of all, any in passage to India, what classes do you see? There is a British administrative aristocratic class, and there are not the native ordinary Indians, but there are, for example, Dr. Aziz, the working class under the British administration. There are two classes. So first you spot the class structure. That's the first thing. Second, you spot the conflict. The conflict that is primarily because of the class difference. There is a strife. There is a dynamics. So Mrs. the wife, Paul's mother, and Paul's father, there is a strife because of the class difference. Dr. Aziz aspires to become like Ronnie or the English officers. He always remains in a kind of an awe with Henry Fielding, with Fielding, Cyril Fielding. There is that class difference. The lower class aspires to be like a higher class. The higher class always wants the lower class to be there, and they both, the higher class wants to maintain the status quo and the lower class wants to go up. There's a strife. That structure is there in every text. So this question is asking you to do that. Okay. Mrs. Moore's character, next question, 7A. Mrs. Moore's character as a bridge between British and Indian cultures in the passage to India. To what extent does she succeed or fail? Beautiful question. So this is a second passage to India question. So we already have 25 questions, 25 marks from passage to India. Passage to India fetches a lot of marks, and it's pretty easy text to do. Mrs. Moore. They haven't asked a lot about Mrs. Moore. Adela quested probably once, where they asked you Adela quested as a feminist. That's it. I don't remember Adela quested ever asked again. Mrs. Moore, maybe once or twice, maybe once. But this is good, fresh question. Bridge between British and Indian cultures. When I teach passage to India and I structure the text, passage to India is structured into three parts. The first part is the mosque, the second is the caves, and the third is the temple. And when I teach the first part, mosque, so when I try to understand the thematic idea of the first part, mosque, in mosque part, mosque also symbolically represents gathering of like-minded people coming together. In the first part of this text, this happens. There is Fielding's tea party, there is Major Calendar's party, Mrs. Moore meets, she's introduced for the first time in the mosque. And she meets Dr. Aziz there in a mosque, inside a mosque. So the first part is coming together of people. So Mrs. Moore deliberately was created with all these devices, that she was introduced in a mosque, she meets Dr. Aziz in a mosque, and she's there in the Fielding's tea party. And then she's also the reason, one of the reasons why they go to the caves, again coming together and gathering. She's trying to bridge. She is instrumental in bridging the East and the West divide, two different people coming together. Whether she succeeds or fails, that has to be your critical evaluation, right? Because that's a very interesting idea. Mrs. Dalloway merges psychological realism with an evolved aesthetic. This candidate, whosoever this is, has underlined these keywords very well. I like this. You have to always understand the keywords. Psychological realism with an evolved aesthetic of, or poetic self-consciousness. So there are three keywords here, three key phrases: psychological realism, evolved aesthetic, poetic self-consciousness. Now we're talking not about the character, Mrs. Dalloway, we're talking about the text. Always remember that distinction. Illustrate with examples from the text. Now three phrases: psychological realism, evolved aesthetic, or poetic self-consciousness. So they've given you two options to pick. You can definitely build your idea on either of the two or merge them together. Psychological realism with an evolved aesthetic. What does that mean? It sounds pretty complicated and difficult to some, but let me try and break it down. First of all, what is psychological realism? Psychological realism is because most of the text is inside the head of the characters. So I won't say just Mrs. Dalloway, but most of the characters. Most of the text is played within the head of the characters. Whether it's Septimus or Mrs. Dalloway, Clarissa Dalloway, or Peter Smith, or even minor characters. We go into their heads. We understand, we know, we see what they are thinking, the psychological side of their. So when Septimus is described, we can take a peep into his post-traumatic stress disorder, right? So psychological realism, as in the text gets as close as possible to really understand, not a hallucinatory or imaginary idea, actually what is happening. And actually the ideas, see, Septimus was going through PTSD, and for his wife or for other people, even for the dead doctor, it was hallucinatory. It was no real sickness. But for him, it was real. It was very much real. Right? So that is why it is called psychological realism. So it merges psychological realism with an evolved aesthetic. Now that psychological realism required evolved aesthetic in terms how it is presented in the text. Aesthetic is how we arrange something. It is often described, design is aesthetic or aesthetic beauty. How something is designed, how something is put together. So the text with psychological realism, a very tricky, difficult thing to put together, but with an evolved aesthetic, Virginia Woolf manages to do that. Does that make sense? Hopefully, I'm able to make it a little clearer for you. Next one. Evaluate Rajarau's Kantapur as a critique of British colonial and imperial rule, as straightforward as a question can be. This is a kind of question that every candidate must prepare, because this is a conceptual idea. Even if you don't get exactly the same question or concept, you will be able to use the ideas from this across. Okay, so very straightforward. So every question, let's say in question number 6, this is a very standard question. In question number 7, this is a very standard question. This is a kind of question that you must prepare. In the short notes, this is a standard that you must prepare. I would even say the idea of time is something that you must prepare in Mrs. Dalloway. You should also prepare socio-political context of every text. So this is also an example of that. You must prepare these questions. Socio-political idea for every text you must know. Any text, they can just change the text and the question will still stand. So these are the questions that are standard. Now, which are the tricky questions? I always say that one question is always tricky. In the short notes, I like B. Smart, tricky question. In question number 6, this one is tricky. This is a UPSC standard, tricky one. Marxist question. I would say this is also standard, very standard. You should be able to do Marxist analysis of every text. Once you understand this format, class dynamics, class conflict, how is it presented in the text? That's it. So this in question number 7, this one is the tricky UPSC standard of question. Beautiful question. Those who do well in these questions will get to 300, closer to 300. Now the last one. How does Joyce portray the artist's struggle for independence and the role of creativity? I in fact touched upon this when I discussed that short note. Artists struggle for independence and the role of creativity. Independence from what? That is the entire thematic idea of this text. Independence from all the societal structures, all the narratives, all the ideologies that we are stuck in. We all are stuck in those ideologies. We have religious bias, spiritual bias, financial bias, class bias, political bias, right? Nationalistic bias, even personality bias. An artist, a true artist, this is what the thesis of Stephen Dedalus in this text is. And this is also the thesis of James Joyce. And any artist must be able to get beyond ideologies. Then only the artist can neutrally, objectively write or produce art that is not biased. Does that make sense? So this is what this question is about. Again, this is a kind of question that you must prepare. It's a key conceptual idea. Bring out V.S. Naipaul's vivid portrayal of the decay of Hindu culture and cultural clash in the multiracial society of Trinidad. Good question. UPSC has never asked anything specifically on the Hindu culture or the Indian diaspora. They have asked about the diaspora, but I don't remember they specifically asking about the Hindu culture. So this is a fresh change. Good idea. Again, it's a pretty standard idea. You should be able to do it. Critically comment on exploitation and dehumanization as brutal realities of industrialization. Okay, so two questions from Sons and Lovers on industrialization. Can you see 30 marker on industrialization? So this is something you should prepare. Even if the chances of something like this repeating in the next year are slim, but this is an idea that in past historically they have not touched upon. Sons and Lovers, they always use this text for Oedipal complex or psychoanalytical assessment. They have not touched upon that. I guess because they have asked you a 20 marker Marxist in this paper, they have asked you a feminist question, they have asked you a post colonial question, no psychoanalytical question in paper 2. Next year, 2026, 110% will get psychoanalysis. Maybe no Marxism, post colonialism, yes, feminism, yes, because they are recurring. Marxism, psychoanalysis, they rarely ask. Okay, does that make sense? So, Sons and Lovers, industrialization, brilliant, prepare it. Always prepare Sons and Lovers and the psychoanalytical assessment of the characters. Oedipal complex, always. For Marxism analysis, they have asked maybe more than once, twice on W.H. Auden's poem, The Unknown Citizen. That is like their staple for asking Marxist question. Okay, we spent good 52 minutes on this. This hopefully this is a brilliant analysis of paper. If you spend time, if you understand what my approach is, hopefully this helps. Leave your ideas in the comments. Do let me know what else we should be discussing. I'll do paper 1 tomorrow. Do let me know how you find it, what else I should be talking about. I'm trying to help aspirants who are going to be sitting for 2026. If you know someone, if you are one, feel free to reach out. I do give this quick 4 weeks, 6 weeks of razor focused answer writing preparation modules. If you have just casual questions, if you just need to ask something on my email, you can always ask me on upsc.english@gmail.com. Obviously there is no charge for that. I'll answer. If you want me to have a look at your answers, simple answers, 1 or 2, I'll be happy to do that. In any way, if I can help you prepare better for 2026 mains, do spread it. Please do share it so that it reaches those who are preparing for this year's paper. Thanks a lot. Thanks for watching. I hope I was able to help you with this. Thanks a lot. Namaskar.